Michael, exciting times. It must be very fulfilling for you. You had a thesis. We got an opportunity to go out and test it. And now we have results and we've published them.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you taking some time to sit down with us and go through it. Before we really get into it, I think one of the key things is really your background. I mean, when we first met, what was so exciting for me was understanding how you had come to looking at active ingredients derived from the cannabis plant and creating therapeutics from them, and what a novel approach you had. And I really thought that it stemmed from your career, starting from your days as a ER. Was it fire? You worked in fire and rescue, right?
Yeah. I actually started off with Copper Mountain Fire Department and then ran with Frisco Fire Rescue ultimately for about 7 years. And, when you're talking about this and you're talking about, I've created novel therapeutics from cannabinoids, and this all sounds really exciting. But for me, it was really a natural kind of organic experience. I was drawn to fire rescue and to medicine, and that is where I got my start. And on a fire department, the attitude is very different than it is, especially when you get into the academic centers, which we're dealing with now with this study that we've had. Fire rescue is about getting things done and getting things done now. So you arrive on the scene of an accident, say with fire rescue. There's never any question about what you're going to do. You go there and you don't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, the car is upside down in the ditch, and it's just tough to get in there right now. We're going to come back later." It's like, no. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like some of these shows, like the rescue trucking shows on interstates where they're pulling trucks out of the ditch. They come in here and there's a truck that's jackknife and it's halfway off a viaduct, and they don't say, "We can't do it." They come in and they're like, "Okay, how are we going to get this done?" And so that was kind of the attitude that I was introduced to in medicine, was your patient, it was never an option if you were going to help them. That was your job, and you got there, and it didn't matter what needed to be done, you would do it. And every step of the way, it just sort of unfolded like that. I was in residency, and HIV was a significant issue, and we really did not have any good treatments for it. It was in the 90s, so it had been known for a while, and it wasn't new, but it was not being well treated.
Well, in Colorado, it was a very difficult place to practice with it. Was it Amendment 2?
Amendment 2, when I got into HIV care, Amendment 2 had just
Most people don't know what that is.
Amendment 2 allowed legal discrimination based on sexual orientation. And ultimately what happened is I wound up owning and operating the largest family practice office that was providing HIV care. And so as far as HIV positive clients, we knew we had about 1,200 people we were following who were HIV positive. You never know exactly how many HIV clients you would have in your practice unless you test absolutely everyone. And we were very aggressive about testing because we had a high-risk clientele. We had a very large gay following, and that's how the office started doing HIV care. Two different directions came in for HIV care. One was infectious disease. But unfortunately, when HIV came about, there was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of prejudice. And Amendment 2 is a pretty good example of that. And there were many internal medicine docs, infectious disease docs, who did not want these gay men in their waiting room. And so they came back to their primary care doctor, their family practice doctor, and they said, "I will not go back there." And so the family practice doctors learned how to treat HIV. And so that's where I got my entry into HIV.
And you were working with some of the, when the protease inhibitor came out,
I was in residency when the protease inhibitors actually came into expanded access. So when I started doing HIV care earnestly, I'd been out of residency, and I called a colleague of mine who was doing HIV care, and I said, "I want to have lunch with you. I want to get in competition with you. I don't like what I'm doing anymore." And he said, "We need to talk." And ultimately, it was his office that I wound up owning. He had just sold it to a corporation, and the corporation was operating the office, and I came in as a new doc and was trained through primarily this provider in HIV treatment. And right about the time that I had completed all of my training and I was starting to see folks on my own, a medical office that was very nearby in Denver went bankrupt. And they had several hundred HIV positive patients. And overnight, I inherited most of them. And so I went from learning HIV care to having a full practice in a very, very short period of time. And at the time when I was studying HIV care, the protease inhibitors had just hit expanded access, and the playing field had changed dramatically. So what happened was within a year, I became an expert because everything changed. And if you had not been current during that year, you were behind because what people were doing 2 years ago was no longer adequate. And so very quickly, when I entered treating HIV, I never had to learn how to treat opportunistic infections. I treated my client's immune system.
Wow.
It responded. The opportunistic infections went away.
Wow.
Now, my colleagues who predated me had to really be good at not only treating side effects of the medications to treat these things that were popping up, they had to learn how to treat all of these really bizarre infectious diseases. I didn't have to do any of that. I learned how to treat the body.
And you focused primarily on the immune system?
Well, I focused on keeping the viral load down so that the immune system wasn't going to be damaged. So my thesis there was that if the viral load was low enough or undetectable, that you could live as long as you wanted to with HIV. That as long, and we knew this from a group of people that were in the Sedona, Arizona area who were treating their HIV through diet, exercise, and spirituality.
Wow.
So they weren't using any medication. So I knew it was possible. But I was a very aggressive medication doc back then. I prescribed about $1 million worth of medications a month. So I was very heavy into the pharmaceuticals. I did a lot of side effect management. So really what I became an expert was bringing novel therapies into clinical practice. And unfortunately back then, the novel therapies that I was bringing into clinical practice were quite toxic. And so I was managing toxicities and side effects of medications. I'd probably do that differently now because now I know so much about the endocannabinoid system. And that's really where I got my entry into cannabinoid medicine, although I didn't know it until I stopped doing HIV care and I had been retired and was doing hospice and palliative care. What my HIV patients taught me was that medicinal marijuana works. Remember, Amendment 2 had passed, and you were legally allowed to discriminate against people based on sexual orientation. And I had the only medical office at the time in the state of Colorado that was advertising as gay and lesbian friendly. When it came time to write letters for medical marijuana, my attorney said no. So I let my attorney practice medicine, and I'm sorry about that. I really am. Because if my attorney had not been practicing medicine for me back then, I would have learned about medicinal marijuana. Now, I was overwhelmed. I was a new doc. There were now things going on in the office where I was becoming the owner of the office and not just a provider in the office. And, you know, there were financial fears that I had going on there, too. I did not have the bandwidth to study all the mechanisms of action. So the protease inhibitors, the non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, and do medical marijuana at the same time and run a medical office and see patients.
Marinol.
Yeah.
Right? So we can talk about it.
Okay, yeah.
Right? It came out in the 1980s. I think if I remember correctly, and we can double check this, I think it came out in the mid-80s. And it was supposed to be synthetic THC, right? And I guess the thought would have been that it should have a similar effect as THC, right? It's the exact... No?
And it does not have a similar effect. It's very different. It doesn't mean it can't be used as an appropriate medication, but it's a lot more difficult to use than the plant.
And so it's not like THC as we think of it.
No. Now, I actually had somebody I did a consultation with about cannabinoid medicines and made some recommendations. This was before I was in production, and they actually took that to their doctor, and their doctor said, I'll take care of that for you, and wrote them a prescription for Marinol. So now they were on cannabinoid medicines.
Gotcha.
Didn't work, but.
So from your practice, you were mentioning that, you know, you had looked at Marinol as a potential. You had patients that were using medical marijuana.
I had patients on almost any kind of medication you could think of. I had clients that were trying to do things, incorporate anything they could find into their regimen. Because remember, when I started this was a death sentence. It had not yet changed to the point where you could live indefinitely with HIV. The idea was, we got about 10 years. I was giving out, new diagnoses of HIV at a time when that was a terminal illness. We didn't know when you were going to die, but if you got a diagnosis of HIV, most people said, I'm going to die. It's going to kill me. Maybe not this year, and maybe I can get it through next year. I had a partner diagnosed with HIV. I was in a serodiscordant relationship. And not only was it HIV, it met the criteria for AIDS. And, what do? I'm hoping I got a few more good years. And so my clients were folks that were saying, I think I've got a few more good years. And at the time when I started doing HIV care, a lot of my clients were coming in and viaticating their life insurance policies. So when I was doing HIV care, I was, doing interviews with my clients. They said, I want to viaticate my life insurance policy. Will you, fill out the paperwork for me? And I would say, I'll fill out the paperwork for you, but you're going to have to sit in this office and we're going to have a consultation about it. Because I'm going to tell you all the reasons why you're taking advantage of this life insurance or whatever company's buying your life insurance.
Right.
And I'm okay doing that, but what I'm not okay doing is letting you believe that you're going to die and you have to viaticate your life insurance policy because you don't. You're seeing me.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little arrogant. I didn't know back then I was going to be quite as successful as I was.
Well, and I know you won't want to say it because it's something that somebody doesn't want to say, so I'll say it for you. My understanding is you covered about 1,200 lives, and that you never lost one to the disease.
Not that I'm aware of. I lost some people to follow-up, though.
Okay.
And I know I lost one client to a crystal meth addiction.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure that he didn't survive the HIV. It may have been crystal meth that got him, but it was HIV. So probably not entirely true. However, no, I do not recall having had a client of mine who died with HIV because of HIV.
And today it's no longer a death sentence.
It should not be.
Or it doesn't need to be.
Right. It does not need to be. There's a lot going on with HIV that I think will, still needs to be discovered.
Yes.
But no, HIV is a very manageable disease at this point in time.
And you were on the front lines of when that occurred.
When I was doing HIV care, there was no standard of care. There were a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And when the protease inhibitors came out, there was a lot of activity about getting standards of care done. I remember being at a particular meeting where some treatment guidelines were being rolled out. And I can tell you that there was not a consensus for what true treatment for HIV was supposed to be. There was a consensus that it was a three-prong approach with at least three different medications would need to be utilized in the treatment of HIV. And there was a lot of good, I think, attempts made to bring things and move things forward. But when the protocols kind of came out with HIV care, even though they were considered to be guidelines, the insurance companies pretty quickly picked up on those and tried to limit what doctors could do. So the advantage that I had when I started HIV care without a standard of care was that we had a license to do what it took. Sometimes I think that license has been taken away from people now that there's a standard of care, because when you deviate from it, there's reluctance to do that. So where I was just in a place where I couldn't follow the standard of care because it wasn't there. I'm a little bit of a rebel anyway. If there'd been a standard of care, I probably wouldn't have followed it exactly because I'd have changed something. But we developed good treatment protocols. And while there are standards to follow, HIV care does need to be individualized. It's critical to do that.
Now, for me, as a student of the history of cannabis and its 10,000 years of recorded history, and interesting for me has always been how important the medical marijuana use of HIV patients was in bringing us to where we are today. Because I don't know if most people, I know you know, but most people don't realize that the landmark case that started medical marijuana in the state of California being openly practiced was a federal judge sitting in front of an AIDS patient and a grandmother that had snuck a pot brownie in. And so it's it's always kind of emotional for me to think about it, right? To think about a federal judge staring at a man in a wheelchair with tubes and a grandmother and saying, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And that's where it really all began. But so so you had your practice. From my understanding, at some point you went into retirement or tried to go into retirement.
A few times. I like retirement so much I do it serially. When I retired from medicine in about 2002 and moved to California where I expected to retire, and that didn't happen, I went back into hospice and palliative care and started studying cannabinoid medicines about a decade ago. And that was around an investment opportunity. Somebody had come to me and, timing was right. And I thought, you know what, let me pick this back up and let me see what's going on here. And as soon as I started to really study medicinal marijuana, I got introduced to the endocannabinoid system. And that's it. So the endocannabinoid system
why don't we take a moment, because I know...
If I had taken an endocannabinoid system approach to HIV care, which I would do today, I would have been much more effective.
Why do you believe that?
Because the endocannabinoid system is the system in our body that is responsible for us being here today. It maintains homeostasis. So anytime we get stressed, our body is designed to handle that stress, but our endocannabinoid system brings us back to normal. So, for example, if you see a deer grazing in a field and that deer's endocannabinoid system is probably balanced.
Does a deer have an endocannabinoid system?
Yeah, absolutely. All vertebrates have endocannabinoid systems. So that deer grazing in the field is having a good day, but the cougar wants to have lunch too. And so it comes by and the deer sees the cougar. Well, the deer is going to go into fight or flight mode and it's going to run away. And if the deer is successful, it will find another field. And in about 10 or 15 minutes, that deer's body will stop its fight or flight mode and return to its natural state of being and grazing and having a good day. The endocannabinoid system did that for the deer. So the endocannabinoid system allows us to go into these stressful areas of life and brings us back. The endocannabinoid system is involved with every single system in our body.
Can you dive a little deeper? How does it work? What is it?
Well, the endocannabinoid system, it's a very complex system. I could describe it, scientifically, it's a system of ligands and receptors. And so you have ligands, which are, messengers. And in this particular case, it's our naturally occurring endocannabinoids. Then we have the receptors that interact with those naturally occurring endocannabinoids. And then we have the enzymes that break down the endocannabinoids so they stop their action. And you can have an interference with any one of those things. Your endocannabinoid system, you could have too few receptors, you could have not enough endocannabinoids, or your enzymes could either be overactive or underactive. So to have an endocannabinoid system in balance is really not a good thing because that's what brings our body back into balance. And our endocannabinoid systems can get out of balance, and they get out of balance when we stress them too much. We're designed to be able to take stress like that deer. But if you put a cell phone on that deer and ping the deer with a message from a cougar every 5 minutes, you're likely to get that deer's endocannabinoid system out of balance to the point where it's trying to bring you into balance, and then you can't get into balance, and it tries again, and eventually it gets stressed. And there are many ways that we can naturally balance our endocannabinoid system, and that's healthy foods, balancing the microbiome, it's meditation, voluntary exercise, but not forced exercise. So there are a variety of ways we do this. The meditation, listening to good music. Anytime you're in the zone, you're balancing your endocannabinoid system. But again, if we've got a cell phone pinging us with a cougar every 5 minutes, we're not going to do that. And the phytocannabinoids, we co-evolved with the cannabis plant. And over thousands and thousands of years, we've interacted with this plant and we've cultivated this plant. So we've taken the bad stuff out of this plant over 10,000 years.
It's again, student of cannabis history, first domesticated 10,000 years ago in eastern China, and then used by the Yemenaya, who went and populated the Eurasia plains, and then actually ended up populating Europe, and then we are their offspring. But to understand that the Silk Road was built with hemp, that these people were the people that invented the wheel, domesticated the horse, and that cannabis was one of the first plants that they domesticated, and they domesticated it for its multi-uses, right? They already were making ropes out of it, using it medicinally, using it as feed, and was in fact part of their strategy for moving their genetics forward.
Right. So we came into contact with this plant in so many different ways. And what we know now is even coming into contact with small amounts of the phytocannabinoids, what we see happen in the body is for somebody who's cannabinoid naive, say they're going through life and they haven't come across the cannabis plant, and we give them a little bit of cannabis, what happens is it upregulates your naturally occurring endocannabinoid receptors. And so your endocannabinoid system just becomes more effective right where it is. And that, to me, is the best medicine. We're giving the body what it needs so that it can upregulate its own systems and heal itself.
I've always thought of it as similar, it's something from our country's history, the scurvy problem, right? Where people didn't realize that complete absence of vitamin C can have rather dramatic impact, and then just a little bit of it.
You bring up a beautiful example because in many ways, cannabis works a lot like vitamin C. And we don't have the medical literature to support this. This is my analogy. But if you look at vitamin C, if you don't get any vitamin C at all, you get out of balance and you get a disease called scurvy. If you take a little bit of vitamin C, that scurvy will go away. 150 milligrams a day, something like that. It's not very much. Eat an orange. So the scurvy goes away and you're happy. Great. Well, you're saying vitamin C is a nutrient then. Your body really needs it for you to be in your good state of being. Well, great. So vitamin C is a nutrient. Well, it's also an anti-inflammatory. I use vitamin C as an anti-inflammatory as a physician. I don't use it very often because I generally have to give it IV. You can give some liposomal preparations too, but generally it's IV. It's done over a long IV push. It takes time. It gives you an opportunity to interact with your patient, but we generally don't have that kind of time, and it's expensive when we have to do it. But you can use it. It's a beautiful anti-inflammatory at a higher dose. So if somebody's walking around and they have an endocannabinoid deficiency and they're not feeling well, if you give them a small amount of a phytocannabinoid, it's going to upregulate their naturally occurring endocannabinoid receptors. And if that's where the endocannabinoid deficiency is in their receptors, you've actually cured them, much like vitamin C.
Yes.
So for people, small amounts of the phytocannabinoids act like a nutrient in many folks. And there's a beautiful triad of fibromyalgia, irritable bowel, and migraine headaches. And when that's truly an endocannabinoid deficiency due to a receptor dysregulation, you give somebody microdosing of cannabis and it goes away, and you are a hero. But generally, we're using cannabis kind of in higher doses too. So if you want to use cannabis as an anti-inflammatory like vitamin C, great. You just can't do it in microdosing. So then we have to go up, and then we have to start paying attention to the different cannabinoids in their profile and the terpenes that are in there, because now we're using it as a medicine. And when we use it in a medicine, it's not just giving the body a nutrient that it needs. We're going to go up on the dose, and now we need to pay a little bit better attention. But the good news about it is we're using a food as a medicine. And when we start with a food as a medicine, the toxicities are very, very low. And as long as we take that as a food and we don't isolate different parts of it, concentrate them, and Frankenstein them back together, cannabis is a food.
Well, and you mentioned toxicity, and this is something that I really make a big deal of in talking to people about what we're doing. Pharmaceuticals, by design, are toxic. You're trying to kill something in the body. It's a poison.
Right.
Cannabis, and I guess we always should clarify for people, because people hear cannabis and they think marijuana and it's very confusing. Cannabis sativa L, the taxonomy, right? You start with cannabis sativa L, and below it are two legal definitions, right? We're not going to get into the genetic varieties because that'll just confuse people, but we have a legal definition that exists, and it's all based on measuring a percentage of THC in whatever it is you're measuring, right? So every plant, whether it's a marijuana plant or a hemp plant, begins its life under the legal definition of hemp.
Yes.
And it is only at some point in its maturity where you can then figure out, has it now become marijuana?
Right, because of the THC or potential
Right.
THC content in it.
Which for us is incredibly interesting because, as you know, THC is sort of a later evolution. First, the plant makes CBG,
Right.
or CBGA to be accurate, right, which is the mother molecule. And so if you catch a plant early on when it's doing that, and since we're mostly interested in terpenes,
Yeah.
it's very easy for us to work within the confines of the legal definition of hemp.
Sure. But, can we come back to something? As you're talking about, what do people think of when you're talking about cannabis or marijuana? And actually what I think they think about is the narrative. This is a dangerous drug with no medicinal benefit. And then they say, oh, wait a minute, things have changed. We now know that there's medicinal benefit. But the part that I think people don't understand yet is that cannabis is safe. Cannabis saves lives.
And it's non-toxic.
Well, here's the thing, but they continue this narrative. Cannabis is dangerous. We must protect the children from cannabis. Now, yes, there's a potential for abuse. Believe me, I'm not out here trying to sell, stuff to your kids in grade school. Okay? And there are some people they need to be protected from who could do that kind of stuff to them. But let's face it, cannabis is safe. The only time cannabis is dangerous is when you get caught using it where it's illegal. There's another time, too. If you use it to take care of your symptoms and you don't know why you're having those symptoms, you can hurt yourself badly. So there are some dangers with cannabis use. But the only time that cannabis can be considered dangerous is when you take it in isolation.
Well, though we do know, right, that there have been attempts to isolate various natural occurring ingredients, right? So I want to be clear. If you start with a natural plant and you do a natural extract, they have tried to kill primates.
And they can't do it.
And they can't do it.
Correct.
And they've given them massive doses over long periods of time.
Well, the joke is, if you want to kill the primate with cannabis, you have to have enough of it, and you have to have it high enough so when you drop it on them, it will kill them.
Yes. I mean, I was always fascinated by those studies, and some of the notes I thought were interesting in the observations, because after a while, the apes were doing pretty well.
Well, the bottom line here is that cannabis is not dangerous. That's the end of the story. Cannabis is not dangerous. And there are a lot of people that are going to go, but wait. I'm going to say, all right, let's take anything else and let's compare it.
Yes, anything.
We've been really under a narrative for a long time that just is not true.
Well, and it's interesting because the origin of the narrative is documented, not contested. It is in black and white in the history of this country.
And it had nothing to do with the medicinal qualities or the danger of this plant.
In fact, the AMA protested the prohibition because they insisted in its value medicinally, specifically. Because at the time when prohibition started, every home in America had hemp syrup in it.
Yep.
Right? It was called hemp syrup.
Yep.
And it wasn't until certain powers started using what was meant to be something that elicited xenophobic feelings by changing the name of a product that was in everybody's home from hemp to marijuana and tying it to the ever-ending wave of immigrants from Mexico.
It's a dark age. This is not a good time in our history.
And then reefer madness, right? Where if you smoke pot, you're going to rape people and jump out of windows. And this was the official policy of our country. Reefer madness.
This is the official policy of our country. Cannabis is marijuana. Marijuana is a dangerous drug with no medicinal value.
It's changing. It's changing. We have
Right
hope.
now, in the present moment, we have, and for decades, have had the information, had it available when Richard Nixon put this in Schedule 1. He went against his advisors. He went against the people he said to bring me the science. When the science came to him, he chose his political career over the science. Anybody dispute that? I think that's really clear. And his action still stands.
It is still the law of the land.
That has not changed.
I'm optimistic. And I'm also enthused because the products we make are made from what's legally classified as hemp. And thanks to the 2018 Farm Bill, means that we're making them in compliance with state laws in the state of Colorado. And so our products are legal and available.
They're legal, they're available, they are safe, they're clean, they've been tested. Yeah, I stand fully behind our products. And our products don't make people high. They don't make people euphoric or drunk. This idea now, now that we have hemp and marijuana, now we have folks out there trying to do euphoric hemp. The only time you're going to do that is if people have limited your access to other things.
So going back, right? So you retired, you went into hospice, you had this lingering sort of question or curiosity from seeing cannabis really work in your practice.
And once I started studying the endocannabinoid system, and then I started going to some conferences and found the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. And gosh, I met Ethan Russo and Dustin Sulek and Bonnie Goldstein. And I think it was probably 7 or 8 years ago when I was at a conference in Northern California, and I was waiting to talk to Dr. Ethan Russo about something, and he made a comment out there in the public, and he said, I have to paraphrase him now because it was so long ago, but I think he said something like, I know I can cure addiction with beta-caryophyllene. And every hair in my body stood up and said, ding, 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 ding. So we now have a formulation.
And we're planning a clinical trial.
Yes, we are.
And
we will put science behind that. Will it cure addiction in everybody? I don't think so. Will it help in most people? I think so. I'm confident in that.
And so about a decade ago, you started looking at cannabis and the hundreds of different active ingredients, just cannabinoids and terpenes, and understanding their complexities. And somewhere along the way, you and I collided into one another.
Yes.
And
this was right about the time, I think, that the Farm Bill was...
Yes, it was leading up to the Farm Bill.
It was leading up to the Farm Bill, and we knew that we could have the opportunity because we could do it 95%. I think 95% of what you can do with high THC cannabis, we can do with low THC cannabis. And I still maintain that today. And so, yes, there are certain circumstances where I think you really do need higher concentration of THC than we can utilize with our hemp-based products. And then we can refer you to somebody or, add that in if needed. You can get that independent. But our products work beautifully, and they're safe. They're foods, natural. They're cost-effective. The only time they're not cost-effective for a patient is if they're not covered by insurance and there are others covered by insurance and they have an incredibly low copay. So we hit all of the appropriate boxes.
And then so we met and we founded Entourage just as we were going into the signing of the 2018 Farm Bill, started doing our original work in 2019, and then in March of 2020,
yes.
I remember getting a phone call from you.
I know. I had planned to, in fact, I had moved to Colorado and was on my second rental had a 3-month rental, I think. And I got a call from office, and I had a home in Palm Springs too, and the COVID center there felt that they were going to be overwhelmed. They knew that I'd been an HIV doc, and they were part of an HIV center there too, and they said, will you come back and help us out? And I said, yeah, I can do that, I think. And I called you. And I really thought we could be more effective there.
Well, first you called to say that you were resigning.
First I called to say that I need to go and do this for a while. I don't know that I was going to resign, but I was going to have to do that for a while.
Yes, you were suiting up, going into the ER. We were just about to start into lockdown.
That's right. And we thought it was going to be
we
pretty
thought
bad.
This was going to be a long time.
And the folks let me out of my lease. They said, you're a doctor. You're going back to treat COVID. You can get out of your lease. Yeah. And so I loaded up the dogs in the truck, and I headed to California. as it turned out, I was doing my continuing medical education to be a COVID doc. The center there really never wound up needing me, even though I was set up to do remote visits and everything if it needed to happen. But, I called you after. I was like, Isaac, wait a minute. I'm going through all the different inflammatory markers they're following in acute COVID, and we can attenuate every single one of those inflammatory markers. I think we can treat COVID. And I was, wait a minute. And you remember, I said, can marijuana treat COVID? And somebody, don't smoke marijuana. It'll kill you if you have COVID. And all, so there's all sorts of conflicting information coming out. And then you said, well, write a white paper on it. And I'm like, hell no. I'm not doing that. And you said, come on, we can do this. I'll get you some help. We'll get a writer. And so we put together a white paper and showed that cannabis and/or its constituents could attenuate every single inflammatory marker that was being followed in acute COVID. Then we, went and we thought we'd find some COVID groups and see what was going on. And I think Chris was the one that came across this group of people that called themselves long haulers.
Yes.
Because we're now in probably
This is May of 2020, June of 2020.
June of, yeah. And then, because we didn't start the podcast probably till July or August.
Correct, yes.
So, that time frame. We came across this group of people, and then we put together I think 10 weeks we did once a week podcasts where I would come on and just give maybe a 10-minute about something with COVID. Like, could we adjust our diets and help? Or but most of what it was to let people ask questions. We came up with a formulation based on the symptoms that these people were having and what was going on. I thought we could attenuate most of them. And so, we had I think it was 3 different chemovars we blended together for our formulation. And we put it out into the market, and I don't know, I think Chris found about 25 people who'd used it. Maybe 15 of them had long COVID. And did 15 answer or 12? Or
So I don't remember the exact number, but the key data was we got down to most people had significant improvement.
Yeah, I think there
fairly
was,
quickly.
But there were maybe only 10 or 15 people. So it was a very low number.
Yes, absolutely.
But they actually talked to Chris.
Yes.
And what was so amazing is that people got in tears with him.
Yes.
Oh my God, my headaches went away. And so to have that kind of response, I was confident it was going to work. I didn't know people were going to cry on the phone.
Yes.
And so we're like, well, we got to do a study. And then it was kind of like, well, we can't do a study. And but we'd put together a lot of work on another study that we were thinking of doing that kind of got killed by the California Department of Public Health just by them sitting on it. But we had developed a way in which we thought we could do this, a lot of the study. Gosh, we weren't doing it remotely then, but...
The original study we were going to do, which was not in COVID, which we'd been prepping for before COVID
was
hit.
with the center in California.
Yes.
And we couldn't, at any rate, we had just sort of gone through oh my gosh, the study we're hoping to do we're coming up against a lot of pushback on it.
Well, it was also during COVID.
And it was during, and then we couldn't do it.
You couldn't do it, and all the types of centers we were looking for were actually closed.
They were.
And so you had no access to patients.
That's right. All that stuff was going on. However, we had done so much work on a study that we were simply able to take that work because our products are all based on hemp formulation. So our safety data was the same. A lot of our data was the same.
That's really what helped us the most was getting prepared for IRB,
right,
for the other study, because our biggest hurdle wasn't the study design, it was the safety.
Right. Our biggest hurdle was getting through an institutional review board to be able to do a study in humans. And to do a phase 4, a post-marketing study in humans with a new product, and to satisfy the criteria for safety in phase 1, 2, and 3, to be able to jump those into a phase 4 and give up an investigational new drug application, but to be able to prove the safety and efficacy, and to be able to do that in about 10% of the time that it would have taken to maybe get an investigational new drug application done.
Yes.
We wound up with a product that we had safety, peer-reviewed manuscript showing its safety and efficacy, and wow.
Yes. And so you were having the interactions with the long COVID patients, the
Yeah.
long haulers back then is what they called themselves, as you
Right.
said. And you
Still have a couple I keep in touch with.
and so we made the formulation. We saw a really strong signal in a very small group of people, but that really led you to designing a trial to go test your thesis.
Well, yeah, and the
For long
beautiful
haul.
thing about it is we'd already gotten a clinical trials person working with us, somebody
Yes.
who's done over 200 clinical trials. So we're able to say, okay, pivot now.
Yes.
We're not doing this particular formulation. We now have Formula C.
Yes.
And we're going to do long COVID. Nobody's paying attention to these long COVID people. And besides, there was so much controversy over what to do with acute COVID that if we even tried to enter that field, people were fighting with each other. It was a mess.
Right.
And the long COVID people were saying, can anybody help me? And we're like, yeah, I think we can. And they're like, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And so we were like, okay, let's do long COVID.
And so you designed a trial, and we'll go into detail in a moment. But I mean, basically, you picked 9 symptoms that you were seeing prevalence of in this patient population, and we used what was the measure that you used for it?
Promise.
The promise.
Promise battery of
yes.
questions. And
Yes.
ultimately, what we saw was that we were able to attenuate 8 out of 9 symptoms in this clinical trial. The clinical trial, again, was not designed to reach statistical significance. It was designed to formally show that we had a signal that would then give us the reason to be able to get the funding for a big clinical trial that we could move forward with.
But
Well, lots of things happened in this trial. This is an amazing trial because it gives us a huge amount of information. It's not straightforward. We did a double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial
single blind is what the cover says.
with a crossover arm
Yes. And it
with
is
a placebo.
I've had to explain this to people, right? Because people ask, why isn't it double-blinded? It is double-blinded in the beginning, the crossover, because everybody knows in the second arm that
They go over to
they go
cross
open,
over
to open label.
Right. So a crossover study means you start off and you observe people that are taking the product or they're taking the placebo, and they don't know which. And then, especially when we're treating people that are suffering, you sort of want to say, hey, if we've given you sugar water, maybe we'd ought to help you later if the sugar water didn't work.
Yes.
And so we do a crossover arm where we say at the end of this trial period, then we're going to switch everybody over to open label product. And so everybody gets the product and they know they're getting product, and we're still following your symptoms. And we also did another interesting thing in this trial. Because of the way cannabis works, and you can take this and it may take 72 hours for your endocannabinoid system to upregulate these receptors and everything else. At any rate, we did a washout period as people switched from either product or placebo to open label. And that washout period and the crossover, thank goodness we did it. Because our placebo turned out to be active. And we'll explain a little bit more about that, because now I've lost half of the audience. They have no idea what I'm talking about. But what happened is we wound up testing our product, and then the placebo, we needed it to taste like our product.
Because of the crossover.
Because of the crossover and other reasons. But we needed it to taste like it. We thought we could just use hemp seed oil. And we knew that hemp seed oil could have some medicinal value to it. We just didn't realize how much. And in addition to it, it turns out there were medicinal terpenes. So our placebo was tested to make sure it was clean, and it was squeaky clean. It just happened to have some medicinal value to it we were unaware of at the time. And so our study results are not straightforward. However, they're not confusing when you know how to take this apart. So we have lots of data, and actually we haven't even gone through all of the data with all of the information on this, simply because I don't have a full-time statistician who will do everything I want them to do.
Yes.
But we showed that we attenuated 8 out of 9 symptoms, and we reached statistical significance in a few of them.
The top 2, according to the Wall Street Journal, they published recently that the top 2 symptoms for long COVID are anxiety and sleep disturbance. And on both of those, we did achieve statistical significance on our active product. That was also a surprise.
Right. That was a surprise. Another surprise was that people who got both the placebo and the active product actually did a little better. And in hindsight, now we've been able to take this apart. And in working with some of the folks that are treating long COVID, they're coming up with the same information as well. So when we collaborate, we're coming up with the same stuff. It is important to have a good omega-3 to 6 fatty acid ratio in your body. It just is. And we know that. And in long COVID, it's even more important, I think. So a lot of this now gets to be my opinion because I don't treat a lot of people. I work, closely with people who do treat folks, but the omega-6 and 3 fatty acid ratios, your microbiome, these are going to be really important things in long COVID. And so the hemp seed oil actually did have medicinal benefit in addition to the medicinal terpenes that were in there. It also showed us that the medicinal terpenes are so medicinal.
Indeed.
That we felt we could take the hemp seed oil and to take another look at the medicinal terpenes that we had and to select some that might be a little bit better than the stochastic event with them being in our placebo. And so we did that, and we have that product available now for a clinical trial, and that's already underway. It's not enrolling yet because of funding, but everything else is in order, and that trial will proceed. So we will have a product that we believe will work better than our Formula C. It will in essence be our Formula C, but instead of MCT oil, we're going to do the hemp seed oil. Then in addition to that, we're taking the hemp seed oil without the cannabinoids at all and using the medicinal terpenes. And even though I am confident that our cannabinoid preparation will work better, I think the amped up version of our cannabinoid one is really going to sing. And I think our Exeltran, which is hemp seed oil plus the selected medicinal terpenes, is going to do really well. So that people who cannot take any THC or cannabinoids because they're police officers, pilots, fire, whoever, they still have an option. And this plant just is so medicinal that even when we remove part of the medicinal part, it works. With the cannabinoids and the terpenes and the flavonoids and the hemp seed oil, we've got a beautiful, complete product. And just to take away one part of it, it's not going to work as well, but it's not dangerous. It just, sometimes we have to accommodate. People want to keep their job as a police officer, and they've got long COVID. All right, maybe the other one would work better, but this one still works. And I don't know what will work better except our Exeltran Plus. So, when we compare our products to our own products, sometimes we have products that aren't as good as our other products. But when we compare our products to other people's products, we do pretty well.
So getting into the paper you just published, my understanding broadly of your thesis, right? You see, what are we up to now? 200 different symptoms, all coming from the same problem. I mean, what does that say?
How do you explain it? What it tells me is that the endocannabinoid system is the solution. So I don't know if the endocannabinoid system was knocked out of balance and caused these things, or if these things caused an endocannabinoid system imbalance. Right now, if we support the endocannabinoid system, everything the clinician is doing will be more effective.
And so you had this broad thesis that
So I've got all of these different symptoms going on in one person. And we know that a few things we know in medicine is it is much more likely that something common will present in an uncommon way than people getting something that's uncommon. And the other thing that we know is Occam's razor, and that is the simplest explanation is the best explanation. And so what do we have? We've got 200 different symptoms going on. Really? How about we have an endocannabinoid system that needs some support? Once we get the endocannabinoid system on board, everything the clinician is doing will be more effective. And it doesn't matter why the endocannabinoid system is not functioning properly right now, the way it was designed to function. We know how to bring it back online. Let's just accept that we are where we are and let's fix it. move forward.
And I'm obviously not a medical doctor, but as a business person, I try to understand these ideas. And so for me, the thing that has become the simplest way to understand the endocannabinoid system is it's like a network, right? And it's a network that's connected to all the systems in your body, kind of like a Wi-Fi or something that's
Sure. It can be connected, like every cell in the body really is part of this Wi-Fi network. A very, very complex system. It has, we have more endocannabinoid receptors in our bodies than any other kind of receptor. I think the CB1 receptor is the most common receptor in the brain.
Wow.
And so these receptors are throughout our body. They're throughout all of our different organ systems. And, I'm trying to think communication, it's really a master communicator. It allows this free flow of communication. And when our body knows what all the other systems are doing, we wind up functioning much better. The endocannabinoid system is very, very complex, as is the cannabis plant itself. So there are multiple number of different components to the cannabis plant. I think last I heard about 400 different components. I don't know, it's going to go up, it's going to go down, but there are hundreds of components. And it's not chemical chaos when you give the cannabis plant to the body. It would be chemical chaos if we went into the laboratory and we picked out 400 different things and we put them into, something, mixed it up and said, here, take this. But we're not doing that. Mother Nature has picked the 400 different components of the cannabis plant. And so what happens when the cannabis plant comes into the body recognizes it as a complete plant. It's okay. These 400 components go together. So there's not the danger of, selecting different components and Frankensteining them back together and trying to get something, because we're using the wisdom and the intelligence of Mother Nature to pick the appropriate components for us. And let me tell you how smart she is.
Well, it's not Mother Nature alone. Again, I think a lot of people, as we've mentioned, don't understand that the plant is a domestic plant.
Well, it is true. Mother Nature provided us the plant. We domesticated the plant.
Yes.
We took out anything over 10,000 years that wasn't working for us.
Yes, and
we co-evolved.
And it's not a wild plant.
It's not wild by any means.
It's not something you forage. And so I jokingly like to say, we think of it as like a shark or a lion or a tiger, but it's really a little pussycat.
It's a pet.
It's a pet.
It's here to love us and help us.
And it was, when it was cultivated, when it was developed, it was, we know that the Egyptians worked extensively with it and bred it for particular different varieties, for different uses. We know the Chinese did the same. All of the ancient civilizations that predated us were involved in using it medicinally, in addition to for textiles and for other purposes. But so the medical use is as old as our civilization is.
Sure. And if you look at the different things that Mother Nature has selected to put in here. For example, the CB1 receptor, THC, interacts with the CB1 receptor and can create what the medical literature refers to as psychosis, and oftentimes is also referred to as euphoria. Sometimes people call it intoxication. But the bottom line is the THC interacts with the CB1 receptor in a way that gets our politicians all nervous. Well, the plant has put something in addition to THC in it. It has cannabidiol in the plant. So what does cannabidiol do? Cannabidiol is a negative allosteric modulator of the CB1 receptor. So when you have cannabidiol present with THC, you still get the medicinal benefits of THC, but you don't get what the medical literature refers to as psychosis. The plant balances itself out. There are people who can develop unhealthy relationships with this plant, and they can have what's called a cannabis use disorder. And I have actually met one person in my life that I think had a cannabis use disorder. And I may contact them again because this person still can use cannabis. They just need to be a little more careful about the chemovars they're using. So when you have somebody who's prone to a cannabis use disorder or any other kind of use disorder, we're going to select different chemovars of this plant that are going to take that into consideration because Mother Nature's already done that. So we know that there's a potential for people to like the THC and the psychosis that it causes or the euphoria, and Mother Nature puts in beta-caryophyllene. And what does beta-caryophyllene do? Across the board in animal models, and a lot of anecdotal evidence in humans as well. But the scientific evidence is valid in the human or in the animal models. It reduces drug-seeking behavior across the board. I don't think there's a drug it doesn't reduce drug-seeking behavior on. So the plant has already put in it the ability to kind of balance what it can do. And the beautiful thing about it is when you have the ability, remember psychosis is also elevated moods can happen there and people feel better and all that stuff. So this plant has every different chemovar, every different strain of this plant is a different medicine. And it has a different combination of over 400 different components to it. And it doesn't mean that one is a good medicine and one is a bad medicine. It just means based on what you need, you have a selection of all this different variety.
So we saw these, you're looking at these 200 different indications. You come up with the thesis that working with or manipulating the endocannabinoid system with specific phytocannabinoids and maybe also mixing in some other terpenes.
Sure. The beautiful thing is that it's the endocannabinoid system I'm looking at. We're not going to take care of this through the natural ways that the endocannabinoid system gets supported. We're going to have to reach for phytocannabinoids in this case. Will yoga and meditation and voluntary exercise help? Of course it will. Why don't you talk to a long COVID patient? Hey, I'd like you to do some voluntary exercise. I can't get out of bed right now. Well, come on, it's voluntary. Just do some exercise for me. Why don't you get out of bed and why don't you pay attention to what you're eating? And by the way, here's some meditation. Let's have you do some meditation. Maybe you can listen to some calming music. I'm not against by any means having these different modalities brought in. We do need to do that. And the long COVID centers are doing a beautiful job in bringing in all these different specialties. They're doing breath work. They're doing rehabilitation medicine. They're really reaching and doing all of the appropriate things to do, but they're doing them in people who need help. The endocannabinoid system, let's get this robust and then let you treat the patient. It's going to work so much better.
As a layperson, business person, I try to understand all this and I try to communicate these ideas to other people.
Right.
And so as a layperson, it seems to me in a sort of cartoonish fashion, if you look at the body as an organization, right, and each of the cells, or think of it maybe as Uber, right? And you've got the corporate office in your brain, and everywhere throughout the world are cab drivers,
right,
picking up people and dropping them off.
Right.
And it's an incredible organization. Now, the endocannabinoid system, as I've heard you explain, is a signaling system. And so that's like the Wi-Fi that keeps that organization, so that keeps every driver connected to the office so they know where they're picking somebody up, know how much to charge, that the transactions happen. Take that business, take away the Wi-Fi. You have chaos. Anybody who's got a passenger in them no longer knows where to take them. Any passenger that was waiting for somebody, the organization can't function. When you take a phytocannabinoid and you reboot the Wi-Fi system, and now everybody can communicate again and get organized again, resolve symptoms, that was kind of your thesis.
Yeah. We needed to bring back the integrity of the whole system. And it explains, when we look through the different symptoms that people are having, and we simply explain it through a system approach, a whole body thing, rather than trying to say, well, let's treat the fatigue, let's treat the anxiety. Well, why don't we take a look at why there's a sleep problem, why there's an anxiety problem, why is there a cognitive function problem, what's going on here? Just take a look at the deer that's grazing, and suddenly a cougar comes by. Is that deer anxious? Yes. Is that deer going to go to sleep? No. Is that deer's cognitive function impaired? Yes. The deer is now locked down in fight or flight mode. And if you look at the symptoms people are having from long COVID, think about being locked down in fight or flight mode for a week. Now think of it for 2 weeks. Now think of it for 2 months. Now think of what's going to happen to your system when you've got all this stuff going on constantly. You burn up your ability to go back to normal. You're under constant stress.
And so you had this thesis where, because there's all these different symptoms, and you recognized, and this is part of what you published with the inflammatory markers from COVID, that you believe that cannabis could actually, by phytocannabinoids working in the endocannabinoid system, could actually resolve a lot of these symptoms simultaneously rather than having to deal with them each time. And so you collaborated with a few long COVID centers, identified the top 9 that we thought were of interest.
Right. We've actually had a real fun time being able to work with some of the long COVID centers that want to work with us and are working with us, and recognize that this is a little bit out of the wheelhouse of Western medicine, and that their administrators and bureaucrats aren't sure what to do with us yet. So they've been guiding us in our studies, even though they haven't been able to do the studies themselves with us. They've been collaborating on the side with us. And that's been a real wonderful experience.
And the 9 symptoms that you tracked in the study?
So the 9 that we wound up taking a look at, the ability to participate in social roles, cognitive function, satisfaction with social roles and activities, dyspnea, which is shortness of breath, emotional distress or anxiety, and then emotional distress is depression, fatigue, pain, and sleep disturbance. And I mean, take all of these and look at these from a system standpoint. You're a deer. The cougar has come. Now the cougar is not going away. Okay, ability to participate in social roles. Do you care where you are in the social standing of the deer? No, I don't think I do, because I got a cougar, and right now the cougar is my problem. Okay, cognitive function. Are you going to think about things? Yeah, I'm going to think about one thing. Get away from the cougar. All right? Other things? No. So cognitive function's impaired, right? Satisfaction with social roles and activity. I'm going to be satisfied by running away. I'm a deer. I'm not going to fight the cougar, I don't think. Maybe I'll kick it, but yeah, I'm going to do something. Anxiety. You're going to have some anxiety. Now think about this. If you've been anxious for 2 months, what do you wind up being? Depressed. You're no longer... Well, you might be anxious and depressed, which is really bad. Fatigue. What's going to happen right away? Are you fatigued? No, there's a cougar right here. I'm leaving. But after doing this for 2 months, I'm fatigued. I'm tired. I can't do this anymore. Pain. We'll talk a little bit more about pain. Are you going to feel pain in that moment? No. Are you going to feel pain 2 months later? Yeah, you're going to feel pain. Sleep disturbance. Are you going to sleep? No. And if you've been under this kind of pressure for 2 months, are you going to have problems going to sleep? Absolutely. So all of these here are under the control of the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system interacts with every one of those.
And if you saw it work with those, you would have no reason to believe that it didn't work with other ones, because...
Well, we only picked 9.
Yeah.
You know, the question is, you know, when you cut the main belt in your car, how many other systems go down?
Right. Yes.
You know, suddenly you're going to have several lights on your dashboard probably.
Yes.
And you're not going to assume that all of a sudden you lost your battery and you lost, the bottom
Right.
line is you're going to look for one cause for all of those things.
Yes. Or at least one thing that's interacting with all of them.
Right. And so, unfortunately, people who don't go to a clinician who recognizes this, and they try to treat themselves, and they get on Facebook or, Wikipedia or whatever, and they start saying, well, I have sleep disturbance. What am I supposed to do for sleep disturbance? They take something for a sleep disturbance. And then they say, I've got something else going on. And then, for our trial, I think the most common reason why we had to decline participants was polypharmacy. And polypharmacy then brings on more symptoms that people treat with more drugs. So it's a self-perpetuating problem.
And so on the manuscript itself, you got the results from the trial. How'd you do?
Well, when we looked at day 28 versus 0 and day 56 versus 0, we improved everything. Now, the trial gets a little bit confusing. We had a crossover arm and an active placebo. And so these results need to be taken overall, and you need to be able to look at certain parts of this trial on how people responded. We had a washout period at the crossover arm switchover. And the idea is that if you're phytocannabinoid naive, it takes about 3 days for your receptors to upregulate and stuff. And so we wanted to give people a little bit of washout if they'd been on placebo when they went over in the crossover arm. And it was a beautiful thing because it showed us when people stopped the medication, their improvement went back. They backslid. And when they restarted the product, everybody got better.
I think we definitely observed a dose-dependent response.
We observed a dose-dependent response, and we observed it in a way that we believe we could have gotten more response had we gone higher in the dose. We believe that we got a beautiful response, but maybe we could have gotten a better one if we'd gone higher. If we'd been able to individualize this a little bit more, I think we would have gotten some better responses as well. Overall, this shows us the product works. There's no question that the product works.
And you
The
were able to
question
improve
is-
multiple symptoms at the same time.
Right, but the question is which product? And then you look at the people that got both product and placebo versus just product, and they overall did a little bit better. And the difference between the product and the placebo really was adding a good balance of omega-3 and 6 fatty acids to the person. There's some in the terpenes. I mean, we can get into some details, but that was really the take-home message was people who used Formula C and got hemp seed oil did better. So what does that mean? It means put Formula C in hemp seed oil instead of MCT oil. So it doesn't taste quite as good. It's medicine.
Yes.
So now we have another trial that is going to pick up that, and it's also going to take care of some of the issues we had with this trial. We had low numbers. We had an active placebo, and we show we're safe. We show we work. The question is, how well do we work? And can we work better than this? And we have another trial that's going to give us some information on that.
And while you were able to improve 8 out of 9 symptoms, clearly, the pain, interestingly, was the one that we didn't improve. And everybody always assumes that anything that contains CBD is focused on pain.
And they're not incorrect. And so again, we get back into now this idea, are we using cannabis as a nutrient? So we're in an environment where we're going through a lot of vitamin C, so we want to give a little more vitamin C. Good, that's fine. Are we using cannabis as an anti-inflammatory? Well, cannabis is a great anti-inflammatory, and what does an anti-inflammatory do? It helps relieve pain, and we have some other ways we do that too, but we do it a lot through its anti-inflammatory effect. So if we're going to use cannabis as an anti-inflammatory and not just with its nutrient stuff, what I think we're showing here is, I mean, come on, we're using a half a dropper twice a day or a dropper twice a day. This is not a lot of medicine. And if we go up on our dose and we get more people involved and we individualize this so that we're treating pain and not just in a balancing mode, perhaps like a nutrient, we're going to have a better response.
As you look at the end, day 56, right, I guess big surprise for us was because the study was not designed for statistical significance.
Oh, yeah.
We got statistical significance on what I think the Wall Street Journal recently said were the number 1 and number 2 most prevalent long COVID symptoms, anxiety and sleep disturbance.
Right. So if we had done this study and decided that we just wanted to check 2 things, people would have said, you just hit a home run. You got statistical significance on the 2 most significant things that are going on in long COVID. And that in and of itself should say, guys, use this product. We have statistical significance. Look at the clinical significance on 8 out of 9 and statistical significance on 2 of those. Let's just pretend that you're treating a long COVID patient who has depression and anxiety. No brainer. I've got your product.
And it also supported your initial thesis, right? That by working with the endocannabinoid system.
Well, of course, we help the anxiety and the depression. And what else do we help? Everything else.
Yes.
Now, if we allow the clinician to say, well, we're treating the anxiety and we're treating the depression. Oh, and this patient also has pain? Well, why don't we use something to treat the pain? Wait a minute, we can use the same thing that we're treating the depression and the anxiety to treat pain. It just means they're going to have to go up on the dose. So instead of taking a half a dropper twice a day, they have to take a dropper twice a day. When we're not talking about 10 times the dose, we're talking probably about doubling the dose. And we've got room to not only double the dose here, we've got a lot of room for movement.
Page 7, there's a table. Talk to us about it.
Well, again, this is really just showing us what we went through in the other table on a graph where you can just sort of see whether people were improving or not improving. And it's broken down, between the two groups. You get a little bit of, this kink in all of the lines that you see here. That's the washout period in the crossover arm. So if you think the medication was not effective at all, there should be no change when they stop taking the medication. And then you say, well, your placebo was active, so we don't think that your medication had any effect. I can say, well, I understand that. And normally in a trial, I would have to agree with you. It could just be the placebo effect. Really difficult to explain those kinks in the lines as a placebo effect when you have this type of crossover arm and the washout period. So what this really did was it saved us from me going, oh my God, we have an active placebo. I have just wasted 7 figures. To, oh my God, we have an active placebo. We had a washout period. Both products are working. We have 2 products, and one is cannabinoid free. I think that's really the home run.
Indeed. And
So what's interesting here, though, from a business standpoint, somebody would have said, I want to do the study with just those 2 symptoms. We're going to reach statistical significance, and that's all we need. From a clinical standpoint, this gives us so much more information.
And let's talk about the placebo for a minute, right? Because I actually feel partially responsible. I'm the guy who made it.
And you made a beautiful placebo. And had it been tested for terpenes, we would have said we need to get rid of those terpenes because it's going to be medicinal. Then we would have really confused things.
Yes.
Because we would have gotten some activity in the placebo, but not a lot of activity in the placebo. This way, we got enough activity in the placebo that it was so helpful that when people stopped it, we saw a significant difference. And then because we did it this way, we also saw that the people that use both products did better. So there's probably something in that hemp seed oil that's helping too.
And we were in a tough situation, right? You and I had been working on developing a placebo that would taste like a full hemp flower product, and we experimented with artificial flavoring and trying to mask flavoring. And at the end of the day, the only way to keep the blind was the closest thing that we could find was the hemp seed oil as the base. Right. We knew it was an active.
Right.
And we
knew it would have something.
We knew it would have something. The terpenes were what we didn't expect.
Right.
And that's because hemp seeds themselves don't have terpenes because the terpenes are manufactured in the trichomes.
Right.
And we suspected that in the manufacturing, because we know how people collect hemp seeds, that you just mechanically agitate the flowers to have them drop out, that must have also harvested the trichomes into the bin because the trichomes weren't trivial in the amounts that we found. In fact,
they were medicinal.
They were the trichome, the hemp terpene level in our placebo was about 10 times greater than your average commercial, quote unquote, CBD product.
Right.
On the market.
And again, what you do is you bring up a good point. We're not talking about CBD. This is not about cannabidiol. It doesn't work for long COVID.
Right.
I mean, it has benefit for obviously, but
yes,
it doesn't work for long COVID because it doesn't have everything we need.
Yes. And you've made many formulations. And the thing that in working with you to execute on them, what you've really focused on is the exact combination of different batches of hemp terpenes, trying to achieve a sort of balance of the ones that you think are especially important.
True, because we are not growing hundreds of different strains of this plant where I can just simply go, this is the one I want for this, and we're going to walk over here, and this is the perfect plant that I want for this person. What we do is we know the medicinal qualities of the different plants. And then we say, well, we'd like this medicinal quality, and for this person, we also need this one over here, and there's another plant over here, we need this one too. Now, I don't usually do it by the whole plant. I just look at the terpenes and I'll say, I'd really like to be rich in this terpene and that. And knowing that when I find a particular plant that is rich in a variety of terpenes, that the other components of that plant are going to go along with that and support it. And so even though I can't test the other 400 components of the plant, I know Mother Nature is wise enough to put things in that are compatible with what I can test. And so I have a lot of faith in Mother Nature when I make these formulations that she's done her job. And I'm formulating all of those components together. I'm not just pulling out the separate terpenes that I want. I'm always taking the full plant. And we could have an entirely different discussion on that, but if you're buying a product from somebody who's not taking, let me rephrase that. When I take the whole plant and I'm working this way, I have a confidence that other people I don't think can have. I'm confident in the safety, and I also have faith that Mother Nature knows what she's doing is going to resolve the symptoms too.
So what is a terpene?
Well, the terpene is the volatile part of this plant. It's what gives this plant the aroma. So by volatile, I mean they go away quickly. And so if you can smell something, it's coming to your nose, it's traveling from that substance to your nose, it's leaving the substance and getting to your nose. So these terpenes are very medicinal, and they're very volatile. They go away very quickly. And the producer that we work with uses ambient temperatures and ambient pressures. And so he is able to maintain very high levels of these terpenes. And we've learned how to be gentle in our extraction process so that we maintain the levels of terpenes that I have yet to see in other commercial products. I've only seen them in research.
One of the very interesting things, which we still have no hard data to explain, but we know unequivocally in the field that even though they're similar versions of the terpene, so limonene, right? You can get limonene from a lemon, you can get limonene from cannabis.
I thought we had hit the, jackpot. Oh my goodness, we're going to be able to help and supplement with these other botanical terpenes, and if we need a little bit more pinene or limonene, we can just get it. It doesn't work. I can't tell you why. It still sounds strange to me because it should. They're the same chemical structure, I think. So it doesn't work. I'm not that advanced in science to explain it. I'm accepting it. And for people that are putting botanical terpenes in and they're going off of the chemical, the COAs, it does confuse the cannabis clinician. If we're looking at a COA and there's a mix of botanical and cannabis terpenes in it, as a clinician, I can no longer know what that plant is doing by looking at the COA. So for me, I don't want botanical terpenes in it unless I know exactly which are the botanical terpenes and which are not. And then when I'm going to look at the medicinal qualities of the product, I'm going to have to subtract out the botanical terpenes that are not from cannabis, and then I'm going to have to look at another COA. That's too much work for me. I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to produce products like that. Now, there could be an exception. We might put in a botanical terpene for flavoring on something, but we're going to be very forthright on that. And we're going to let people know this terpene is not cannabis.
Right, so it's not an active ingredient.
Right, so it's not a bad thing to do. And I still have a little bit of an issue about trying to flavor medicines. They're not candy. We don't want kids to think of medicine as candy, and I quite frankly don't want adults to think of medicine as candy either.
And then, moving on, if we go to page 9, we have a chart there that was on the PGIC score.
So this is information coming from the patients about their impression of their improvement. And while it is a subjective measurement, it's done objectively because we're asking them on several different occasions and trying to figure out, are they feeling better or not? Is their quality of life improving? Do they think that they are happier? Because I tell you what, if I think I'm happy, don't tell me I'm not, because I'm doing okay. So these scores, I think, are one of the most important ones we're ever going to track. And that is, did this intervention help your life? Did it improve your quality of life? Looks like it did to me.
Well, and again, I'm not a doctor. I just look at going from 1 to 2 as a double.
Oh, I don't know that you just double it. I mean, if you think about it, if you're feeling badly and you start feeling just a little bit better, that beginning of starting to feel better is really, really important. And so I don't want to give you the impression that when we double the amount that you're getting twice as much benefit, because let's face it, if you're stopped in traffic and you're stopped on the interstate and you start going 10 or 15 miles an hour, you're feeling pretty good. You do that for 20 minutes and you're like feeling bad again. But during that first initial, you're starting to move. That movement is very important. And so I don't want you to just think of it, just take that into consideration, that it's not always just linear with things. And that the little bit of improvement in the beginning may be the most important you get. If you've got somebody who's been sick for 2 months and there's no movement, your risk of suicide goes up dramatically. And if we can give them a little bit of improvement, that risk drops dramatically. Don't underestimate the importance of that initial improvement when you've had nothing that has worked for so long. I mean, come on, look at pharma. They get 15% improvement. They're going to dance. We did 15%. Okay, well, that's good for you. We're doing a lot better than that. This is really important.
So talk us through the data. I mean, what does this chart tell you?
It simply tells me when you look at something that's increasing, I mean, come on, you got a line that's going up like this? That's what you want to see in your portfolio, isn't it?
Yes.
So look at this as your portfolio. Patients are getting better. If you take a medication, say you have cancer, and you take that medication, and your cancer goes away, and you are vomiting every day, what's going to happen to the PGIC scores? They're not going up. So we're not only helping with their physical symptoms, they're getting better too. So treatments can decrease your quality of life. We're not doing that here. We're increasing their quality of life, and I think that's what medicine should be doing.
Group B did better.
Both groups did well. And we know that when we took both groups together overall, when we looked at the symptoms, the people that got both the placebo and the product did better. And we know that we've got great products here, and when we combine them together, we have the magic.
We did not get statistical significance on Group B.
Did we get clinical significance?
We did.
What does statistical significance means? It meant there is less than a 95% chance that this occurred by chance. So I have to go back and I have to pull our p-value, and then I could tell you what by chance. And the other thing that we're looking at here too, remember, we're not comparing a group of people to a control group or a group of people to a true placebo. We are saying we didn't reach statistical significance, meaning that the people that got something that helped them and people got something that helped them more, there wasn't a statistical significance between the two. Doesn't mean that the people didn't have statistical significance had we had a true placebo or a control. So I can't talk about this in really beautiful detail with that. What I can tell you is this is going the right direction. And this is why this study is not as clean and easy just to say this is conclusive. Although I can tell you it's conclusive because all of the people improved. All right, they improved over their baseline because we didn't have a control group. I know we thought we were going to have a placebo, and it wasn't a true placebo. So we can go around and around, and the academic people will probably throw this study away. You didn't do it right.
Though we have a second study coming.
But you didn't do the first study right. And I'm like, okay, we had an active placebo. We've got a huge amount of beautiful information in this. And if you really want to know, we could run those numbers and take them apart ad nauseum, but we don't have a large number of people in this trial. It still can't be conclusive. Do you need something more conclusive than this? I mean, if you need something more conclusive than this, you can wait until our next study is done. It'll be more conclusive.
And again, just to point out, your broader thesis was, I have all these symptoms. I know there's one system I can work with that will impact all of them. And so we should be able to impact multiple symptoms simultaneously.
Of course we do. But isn't this the one that you really, as a patient, want to know about? Did my life improve? And if you look at this and, well, did the life improve better with the placebo or did the life improve better with the product? Doesn't really matter, does it? Look at where they started and where they are. They all improved, and they all improved to a point that if we had our placebo and we were testing our placebo against a true placebo, we would have a great product. And if we take our product and we test it against the placebo, we have another great product. And you could say, but you didn't reach all of that. And I'm like, it wasn't designed to do it, but it shows us the information.
And it did support your thesis that by working with a single system, you could dramatically improve multiple symptoms simultaneously.
This study has been a little roller coaster.
You're not kidding. I remember when you called me to tell me that we had an active placebo.
And we even decided not to call our other team member so he could have a good night's sleep.
Yes.
And then I also remember going, I do not know why, that I think this is a good thing.
Yes.
And then overnight, it did turn into it took a couple more days.
Yes. And we had to find the terpenes.
We did.
Right. Once we found the terpenes, and they were similar terpenes to the ones you had selected.
Yeah.
And
we're not too far off.
It's like, wow, that's discovery.
And it is very consistent with the idea that everything out there on our paths is available to us to elicit clarity for an even more robust path if we're willing to look beyond it being different than what we had expected.
Indeed.
Because I would no longer trade this study for the two. We're going to check anxiety and we're going to check, sleep, and we're going to show that we improve that, and that's all we're going to get. This study shows so much more.
Any final thoughts on the study, the results, being published, going forward?
What this study did, even though this study was really designed to just go and get a signal, what we have here now in humans, it's a phase 4, it's a post-marketing study, and we're done in humans. We don't have an IND, which only means that we don't patent this product and we can't go out there and market it directly to people, which we should not do anyway. This is a clinician-guided product. And I know for me, as an early adopter, every I is dotted and every T is crossed that I need to put this into practice. And in fact, there's a lot more I's dotted and T's crossed than I've done with some pharmaceutical products in the past. So I'm ready to put this into clinical practice. And my take home is, believe it or not, the early adopters, I believe now, have everything they need to use this in a clinical setting and to get good results. And those people who want to criticize are always out there. I was called a quack for checking homocysteine levels years ago. People said, what are you going to do about it? I said, well, a B-complex vitamin. They're like, oh, really? Well, that would do it? Yes.
We talk about Western medicine, right? And a lot of times I feel like what our company really is doing is translating mountains of anecdotal information into evidence-based medicine.
That's really all we're doing. I mean, what we're doing more than that in that we are taking the evidence-based information that is out there, the scientific information, and we're creating formulations based on that information. We're creating safe products because of what they are. Putting them into the field, we can't know for sure that they're going to be effective as we study them, but we're taking the information that's available to us from the mechanisms of action of all the different terpenes and the different receptors. We have mountains of information, and it just hasn't been put together in a nice way to present to a Western-trained doctor in how to use it.
And so you're taking what's generally considered known and accepted within the physician population that already works with cannabis to treat patients. We're taking what we learned from that. We're working with hemp, right? So we're taking it outside of a Schedule I classification at this time.
Right.
And then making a...
So things have changed. In roughly 2019, because the Farm Bill was signed in December of 18.
Yes.
And we had the ability to put this into human trials in an easy way because we were no longer federally illegal. Somehow or other, they recognized hemp and not marijuana is medicinal and not dangerous. And so we're able to use this now. And what I'm doing now is kind of cheating because I'm taking all of the information that everybody gathered up in the best way they could while they weren't allowed to study this in the best way they could. And I'm saying, well, all that information is valid. And now I can study it in humans. And really the most significant thing that I have to do is prove safety. And then I need to put together the evidence that supports why I believe this will be effective, and that's pretty darn easy because they're mountains. And then they say, okay, put it in humans. It's all right. We've been using it for 10,000 years. You're not going to hurt anybody. And even though occasionally we've had an institutional review board that I think we've had a little pushback from certain members because this is a dangerous drug with no medicinal benefit, that narrative is still there. But the institutional review boards go back to the science and they say, yeah, well, the science says this. And they're like, okay, let them do the trial. Mm-hmm. Isn't that what trials are about? Put this in people, we'll watch. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is safe. Who's died of a cannabis overdose?
Well, and for me, I used to be a biotech banker. Mm-hmm. And I remember one of the things that really fascinated me that I learned was that we could kill a rat with anything and we could cure a rat of anything.
Yep.
Because in order to do all the clinical trials on the pharmaceuticals, they developed recipes to create rats that had any disease that we wanted. Mm-hmm. And if any trial started in phase 1, you've at least cured a rat once, mm-hmm. right? And so because we weren't concerned with the collateral damage of the rat, we were able to, as you said, give it to the rat and observe. Now that we're working with something that's non-toxic.
We give it to the people and observe.
And that speeds up the development process because it also lets you iterate in real time. It's not you made a patent, we developed a molecule, we're halfway through and the rat dies because that's the end of your business and you have to start again. You come up with a thesis, we give it to the human, it doesn't do exactly what you thought it might. Mm-hmm. You make an adjustment, you give it to the same human until you see the adjustment that you're looking for. Now you have a formulation.
Right.
And you keep moving. It's a very different process.
What I do, I'd hate to go into it in real detail because what I do is really pretty simple. I take existing information and I use some knowledge that I have about the likelihood of different chemovars of plants to looking at their chemical composition, what their medicinal benefits would be based on their chemical composition, and then I blend things together. And of course they work because
they've been working.
They work. It's like, if you use this, you'll get this. And I'm like, okay, let's use this, let's get this, and let's document it. So really all I'm doing is documenting what other people have done. And they just didn't document it. I mean, if you want to call it cheating.
Or productize it.
Well, that's fine.
Which is important, right? Because as you told your story to me originally, medical marijuana is still predominantly practiced by people smoking marijuana. And that's got some chemistry issues.
Yeah.
Right? It's not as pure a delivery method necessarily because you've got combustion.
There are polyaromatic hydrocarbons in there, and we don't like those, and neither does the body.
And so it's also not a practical way to reach large populations. Right?
We've made it a little easier to use mm-hmm. and done some things. It's like giving away trade secrets. I sort of feel like I don't want to tell people what I'm doing because they'll do it, but most people aren't going to do it. And really all we've done is to take existing information, repackage it in a way that people can understand. Mm-hmm. Show them that this is safe. We're taking clean products so you can be assured of its safety. We're studying it so you know that there's some clinical stuff that's gone on here, and we're not just postulating that this will work, but we're using things that have been known to work for a long time, and we're just documenting that they work.
And that's also how you came up with your original thesis, right? You were doing your CME work. Mm-hmm. And you had been reading papers on cannabis, on SARS.
Yeah.
Because it's been studied.
Right. I mean, we take the existing information that's out there, and there's so much of it. I'm not stealing information from anybody. In a way, it does feel like cheating. I'm taking other people's work. The people who are alive and around, whose work I've taken, I have interacted with them, told them I'm taking it. Invited them to be a part of us.
Yes.
And I think we probably have one that may come on board at some point.
Yes.
A lot of information about cannabis is now shared in conferences, and we now have real medical conferences on cannabinoid medicines.
Well, then
This is great information, and the big industry in this country that would normally pick this up and run with it is not, because they can't patent it. And I'm saying, okay, I can't patent it. Let's not make it about the patent. Let's make it about the patient.
Let's talk about patents just for a moment, right? Because biotech, mm-hmm. Again, I was a biotech banker in the 90s, and biotech back then meant that you were using biological actives. And most of the companies using biological actives did not have patents. You couldn't patent anything,
Right.
but they had trade secrets.
Right.
And the trade secret route actually gave them, because they never expire.
Right.
Right. And they never expire, and you never have to publish what you're doing for people to then copy you. And there never is a
Publishing
generic
patent. You are spot on.
And so it's not, from a commercial standpoint, it's not a disadvantage to work as a biotech when you're a biotech. It's just biotech has changed its meaning in the popular sort of use of it, and Wall Street has corrupted it to simply mean biotech means pre-revenue and pharma means post-revenue.
Yeah.
But that's not what biotech means originally. And so when you say that you feel like you're cheating, I think your cheat took you 10 years of studying. And, me coming on from the product side in this industry and really understanding what it takes to make certain types of products, without your understanding, these products couldn't exist. Making them is incredibly difficult, as you mentioned, because of our focus on the terpenes specifically, how volatile they are.
You see, and you compliment me on what I'm doing, and what I will say is it's our producer that is the real gem here, because
Yes.
I believe anybody can do what I've done. I don't believe anybody can do what our producer's done.
Yes.
For me, yeah, I put the time
And
and
the
effort in.
combination
So
of the two of
maybe
you.
I didn't cheat. I took the time and effort to go in and learn what other people had done, and to listen to the people that said, hey, guys, this works. And nobody will listen to me. I'm a stoner. And I'm like, come talk to me.
Right.
Because you got good information for me.
Well, and it's funny, the endocannabinoid system is not taught in medical school.
Not routinely, at least. I hope I hope they are now. I mean, they got to be now, right? After COVID? Well, maybe not yet.
And so just for clarity, I mean, there is no conspiracy theory, controversy, theoretical study of the endocannabinoid system. I mean, it's just scientific fact at this point.
Yeah. It is not controversial that we have an endocannabinoid system.
And that it's the largest system in our body.
That has the most receptors in our body and interacts with every other system, and that we have more endocannabinoid receptors than other receptors in our body. Now, maybe some of that will change a little bit, but the gist of it is we have a system that was discovered when I was, I think, either right before or while I was in medical school, and that system doesn't support other systems that are in place today, and so it's taken a long time for it to be truly recognized for how important it is, and still is not recognized for how important it is.